The ANC has made a number of promises following its 55th National Conference. These include renewing the organization, addressing unemployment and gender-based violence, and that includes ending load shedding. But can the party stand by these promises? Well, for some analysis, we're joined by Mondli Makhanya. He is Editor-in-Chief at the City Press newspaper, and he joins us via the virtual platform. Mr. Makhanya, thank you very much for your time. Allow me to turn that question back to you, which was in the form of your article, which says, and I'm reading the headline now, can the ANC really stand by the promises they make? If recent history is anything to go by, is this party capable of delivering on its promises?
Good morning, Kali. And I hope that you would start by asking me to interpret the Portuguese that was in the previous segment. But anyway, we'll let that go.
Please go straight to the matter at hand, Mr. Makhanya.
Yeah, you know, if we look back to 2017, 2018, when Cyril Ramaphosa came in as president, South Africa had been through hell. I mean, under the Jacob Zuma administration, some would say the Jacob Zuma regime, what Ramaphosa now describes as the 9 wasted years. And there was such great hope in the country that Ramaphosa coming in and the people around him would bring a season of regeneration in the country. And Ramaphosa himself, in his speeches on January 8, 2018, and in his very, very powerful inaugural State of the Nation address in February of that year, actually did give us hope. He gave the nation hope, and there was a lot of belief that something new was going to start to happen in the country. And he himself says, it's a new dawn. It's a period of it's a period of hope that we are reinstilling hope in this country. And what has happened in the past 5 years has been a massive disappointment, and disappointment is actually, I think, it's actually downplaying what has happened in the past 5 years, because actually the country has gone backwards. There have been little green shoots here and there, with particularly with at the NPA and in the security cluster, but actually the country has gone backwards. We've seen the rapid decline of PRASA, and the economy has not really regenerated. And we actually have seen corruption not only continue, but in many respects get worse.
Yeah.
So I think that for us now to believe that because Ramaphosa now has a second term, he has a new lease of life, and South Africa can begin to believe again, I think it is being naive of us as South Africans.
We'll talk about that renewed mandate of President Cyril Ramaphosa a little later during our conversation. Let's use an example, Mr. Makhanya. You write about an unforgiving Eskom, which has had a massive negative impact not only on the economy of the country, but indeed the mood of the nation. Now there are developments which came as a result of the president's interviews yesterday. Let's start with whether or not you think there is a glimmer of hope in the near future around the electricity crisis.
I do not believe so. If you remember well, there was, again, in 2018, one of the first things that Ramaphosa did was to appoint a new board of Eskom and a new acting CEO, Phakamile Hadebe, and as well as who later then became the permanent CEO. And at that particular period, Eskom was the most urgent thing to be done in the country. The fixing of Eskom was the most urgent thing. But we are here 5 years later, and we are today on stage 4, and we've been experiencing stage 6. And it has been, 2022 was the worst year of load shedding. So what did happen positively in 2022 was that there was a loosening of letting independent producers come onto the grid, something that could have happened a lot earlier, and we would not have been in this state had that actually happened earlier.
Yeah.
But what happened was that Ramaphosa's very, very closest ally, Gwede Mantashe, was the person who was at the forefront of stopping the reform of the energy sector from happening. And Ramaphosa could do nothing about that until the very end, until we actually did get to stage 6. And even then, it has been very, very slow. And now you have a period where under Director, and people deride him a lot for the fact that he actually did not get to fix Eskom. It's not a one-man show. Actually, you actually have to have the entire administrative system in tune. And so now we are in a situation where we are at stage, like we're in stage 4 today, as I said, and it is likely to get very much worse. And you actually need to be very, very drastic about fixing Eskom. And I think that the main thing is that you actually have to have Gwede Mantashe marching to the tune of the country, to the tune of the president, and to the tune of the policies that the cabinet has adopted. But Gwede Mantashe is the biggest obstacle. But unfortunately, he happens to be the most powerful person in the ANC, because Ramaphosa owes a lot of his getting a second term to Gwede Mantashe.
I suspect you're going to use the words a prime minister of sorts. But let's talk then about Mantashe. And this is the man that you say his responsibility was to put new megawatts to the grid. The ANC resolutions, as commented by the president yesterday, instructs or directs that state companies operating in specific sectors of the economy should be overseen by the relevant departments. Therefore, that means Eskom is going to fall under the energy department, which means it falls under Mr. Mantashe. Good or bad move?
I think the principle itself of the dissolution of the Department of Public Enterprises, the Ministry of Public Enterprises, is a good one. It was one of those ministries that actually made no sense. You had particular SOEs reporting to 2 ministries, effectively. The minister, Transnet reporting to transport and to DPE. But now you actually will have policy certainty and implementation certainty. So it's a good thing in itself. But insofar as Eskom and the Department of Energy is concerned, and in particular the person of Gwede Mantashe, I think that is a negative. But because Gwede Mantashe has been the biggest obstacle of us moving forward with the energy reform. But let's not make the main person the person. I think that in principle, if you had another minister who was more open-minded, more energetic, and less defensive of fossil fuels in that particular department, it is a positive step.
Where does that leave public enterprises then? Does that mean that department is essentially defunct?
I think it is a death knell for the Department of Public Enterprises. When the cabinet reshuffle happens, and it's not an if, it will happen, and it will be a much bigger cabinet reshuffle than we've seen in the past 5-6 years. The Department of Public Enterprises is most certainly dead. I think it will be phased out. So the ministry will die, but the department will be phased out over a period, because the various entities will obviously need to be parceled out to the various ministries and departments. But it is the end of the department, but also it is the end of the career of Pravin Gordhan, who has been a person who has been at the right hand of Cyril Ramaphosa, but actually who has not been the most effective person in terms of fixing our SOEs.
Yeah. All right. Let's revert to your article to help us end the conversation then. The sum total of what you've written there, Mr. Makhanya, is that we would be naive to think that this is going to be a happy year. And as you have listed, starting from 2020 when the pandemic arrived. But then there is what some people view as optimism around the new mandate that has been given to President Cyril Ramaphosa, and more so, based on your article where you say the emphatic mandate from the party which will allow him to do things he was constrained from doing when surrounded by a greater number of his foes. Does that count for anything at all? Is that likely to contribute to lifting the mood of this nation?
Look, I'll keep going back to 2017-2018 when Cyril Ramaphosa came in. He had the biggest political capital ever. The country was behind him, the ANC was behind him, and people wanted him to do things. And he could have done things at that particular period, and he wasted that. He just simply does not have the backbone to do anything. And now there's a belief that because he has a much bigger contingent of his own people in the NEC and in the top 7, that he will start to do things. I think it is very naive. He's going to be in the period that is basically what is called lame duck now. People are looking towards the next president. That's what's going to be happening over the next 5 years. People will be looking at who is likely to be the next person, and Cyril Ramaphosa will be challenged. And the thing is, to believe that the people who are around him necessarily want him, are necessarily beholden to him, it is not the case. Those people will be fighting among each other. And Cyril Ramaphosa has been known not to be able to solve disputes between his own ministers in the past. And he's not going to be able to solve disputes among his top 7, and he's not going to be able to solve disputes among his cabinet ministers. He's just not that person. He's not a doer. He's not an implementer. And I think that we will go through another 5 years of drift, another 5 years of nothingness. And it's terrible that kind of like that as we begin a year that Ramaphosa in his speech at the ANC's functions has been describing this the ANC as the merchants of hope. And that is what the ANC has been giving people, just simply giving people hope and letting that hope down. And unfortunately, as we begin this year, I will be the merchant of gloom in terms of just saying that nothing of that we are promised is actually going to happen.
Mr. Makhanya, why would you want for us to start the year in this fashion? Just out of interest, you said Gwede Mantashe is probably the most powerful politician in the ANC right now. What do you see the future for him looking like?
Now look, Gwede Mantashe is serving his last term at the helm of the ANC, and he will be serving his last term in government, so until the 2024 elections. But if Ramaphosa does come back, the likelihood is that Gwede Mantashe will insist that he wants to continue. But the thing is, like, it needs for the president to be firm and actually say, look, you are old, you are out of tune with what the future holds, and actually I need to get rid of you. But he is not the person. And I think that there is the positive, if I can say, if I can understand. The positive is that there's a great crop of people in the ANC right now, at the helm of the ANC. Younger people like David Masondo, who's the Deputy Minister of Finance, who actually can begin to take the ANC forward. Ronald Lamola, for instance. And Ramaphosa needs to be firm enough to say, this is the generation that we at this level are grooming to become the next leadership of this country. But I don't think he is bold enough at this particular point to actually start to empower those people for the way forward.
Mondli Makhanya, Editor-in-Chief at the City Press newspaper. Thank you very much for your time and indeed your insights.